It's that time of year that I don't know about everybody else. There's just so much going on in the world, in our lives, as we sort of do this, what feels like rush to the end of the year. We thought that it might be great to just take a moment for all of us to arrive here for this conversation. So I've asked Emma Rose to help us with that. So just, Emma Rose, as folks are coming into the room, can you give us a guided moment of arrival, maybe just to have everybody settle?
Sure. So I think to make it short and sweet and simple, maybe let's just try noticing what it feels like to breathe intentionally. So I invite you to take 3 deep breaths. You can close your eyes if that feels nice. And feel your feet on the floor. Notice where you are in the room. Your mind might have been somewhere crazy all day today, but now here you are. And as you take your last breath and breathe out, we want to invite you, as we kick off the conversation, to consider what a wild year it has been. 2020, here we are at the end. What has it meant to you? What comes to mind first? And we invite you to share that in the chat. And if you want to remember all panelists and attendees so that we can all see your answers, that would be great.
All right, so let's actually start with us, right? Jim, for you, what's on your mind regarding 2020? Keeping in mind, we've had a little longer to reflect on that question because we knew we were coming in here. And again, everyone in the chat, we just want to know what's present for you regarding 2020. Jim, for you, what would you say?
Well, especially as it pertains to the topic of today, which is what do we learn from 2020 and how are we going to move it into 2021? I actually tapped into several folks that I think are pretty astute thinkers, pretty insightful, pretty good at sensing things around. And the theme that kept coming out for me is this was a year that required leadership. This was a year that nobody had the book for, nobody had the map for, and to be able to actually, as a leader, figure out what's my role to bring a team together, to actually pay attention to what's happening around us in a real way, connect us to reality. And for leaders there's a distinction between leadership and management that I think came to the fore this year, and that's the notion that in essence, or in general, management makes happen what was already going to have happen in an efficient way. And what leadership does is it helps us create a future that wasn't possible if we didn't create it ourselves through our actions. And so whether it was keeping a team together or discovering a new way or deciding how we're going to manage this virtual space or transform our world from what was a face-to-face world to one that was more on the interwebs, really required leadership. And the other piece of it wasn't just the leader creating it out of the dint of his own efforts. It was really looking at how do I bring a community together? How do I unlock a community and its brilliance and in its connectivity? And in that process, create more trust, create more connection and better results. So if I had to put a headline on it, this was a year for leadership.
And I love that comment about leaders create what wasn't possible before, right? So that, because if we think about it, there's so much of this year that we could not have possibly imagined, right? And I see a lot of comments about, Judy commented about renewal. I saw another comment about pivot, right? There is something around this really having to reimagine, re-envision what's possible in the world, right? And so, and that's really an act of leadership in order to do that.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. And I think what just about every leader I know realized pretty quickly is she or he didn't have all the answers. So it wasn't like they had the answers and they were going to dole them out. It's like, holy moly, I don't know what to do either. How can we all figure this out together? And in that way, create a connective tissue that wasn't possible. So a lot of teams that have done that, a lot of leaders are actually further along into how their group works together. So it was a wonderful opportunity for reimagining what leadership looks like.
Mickey, what's present for you about 2020? What would you add into anything that Jim just said?
Well, I'm looking at a lot of what's coming in the chat, and thank you all for sharing yourselves. This was really touching. But we're seeing words like loss and struggle and intensity and resilience said several times. And you look at those kinds of experience where the unexpected is also unwelcome. You know, that we've had a year that's rich with shock. And what I've seen around the world with a lot of people that we admire and some people that I've been deeply disappointed in is the responsibility for a leader to make sense of what we're in, to include people that help him or her make sense when personally they can't. It's really illuminated that the job of leadership is to make meaning, is to have whatever's happening give us an opportunity to contribute. And I've seen leaders do that brilliantly this year. I've seen different leaders facing similar conditions where some of them are complaining and others are actually empowering people because they talk to enough people to get ideas about how to explain the situation that opens up people's interest in helping and making it better. So if in the face of this intensity and loss and struggle, the leaders that find in there an opportunity for people to contribute, to me, are the heroines and heroes of the year.
Well, there really is this theme of leadership. You know, I see a couple of comments about this, about not being the ones that have the answers, but really can convene people to find the answers. Because if there's anything we know about 2020, there is no handbook laying around for how to deal with everything we're in the midst of, right? And so I think inside of that meaning, Mickey, that you're talking about, can we actually lean in and bring the community together to help find those answers? Or do we fracture the community by blaming or being divisive in those moments? And so I think there's really something about the power of community to solve what feels like unsolvable challenges that we're faced with.
You know, I don't know how many people are old enough on this little conversation we're in to remember what I'm about to allude to. But back in the 60s, when we were going through the Bay of Pigs and a lot of other things happening that looked like we were on the verge of nuclear disaster, back then when I was in 8th grade and 7th grade, we used to have these drills and radio commercials would come on that would go with this beep that would say you were practicing for whether or not there was a disaster. And somebody sent me this year something that I saw years ago, but I could tell they're as old as me. And they sent me a little sign and it says, if this had been a real life, you would have received further instructions on where to go and what to do. Because that's what we were told back then, you know, that this is not a real emergency. If it had been, you would have received further instructions. So I think what we ran into this year is what we already know was quickly used up. So our capacity to host discovery has been a huge part of this year. And the leaders who are willing to give the unanswered question to the larger community to tap in to that kind of resilience and intelligence, they produce a lot of value. And the ones who kept holding the responsibility close like they're supposed to have the answer, I've seen really suffer. I've seen some well-being breakdowns from leaders who took so much on themselves when the real resource for the challenges they were facing was in the larger community.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I love that notion of how do we take advantage, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but how do we tap into the community in new ways? The other thing that was available to leaders in this space, I think this year, was to either prove that the culture we want and the values we say we want are real or they're not. They're either ones we are going to have us steer this year over and how we're going to deal with it, or we're going to put them aside and then we'll pick them up later. So what I've been saying to a lot of people is people have long memories about this time. They will have long memories about how leaders led in these difficult times. And one of the things they're going to pay attention to is were we serious about our values? Were we serious about our culture, even or especially when it was hard? Or did we do things outside of that and then we're going to try and pick it up later? Because people are bloodhounds for that kind of inconsistency. So how we resolve the issues using our values and culture was an opportunity for leaders to constantly assess, are we doing it in a way that's consistent and coherent with who we claim to be? Because it's hard, man. It's hard these times to be true to the values and the culture, especially culture writ large. You know, the new elements of culture. And Robin, you've been very intentional about bringing that to us, about what's happening in the larger culture that's disrupting what we thought was, you know, under the surface a little.
Well, I think the other thing that comes to mind for me about that, Jim, is I think for too long, we've had, in our words, an impotent explanation about what it takes to create culture, right? So we've said that culture actually requires all of us to be in a spot together. And I actually think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned this year around it tests you. So if the culture isn't straight, well, this format of working will test that. We'll push the boundaries of it, but you can actually develop, enhance, rely on the culture of your organization, regardless of the method of connection, right? Like there are lots of ways to do that. And I think for too long, we've said, you got to put everybody in a room together to have that kind of meeting. And I think this year has proven maybe, and maybe not. Maybe if you actually are really intentional about the ways that you connect, there are other methods to do it than having to have everybody sit next to each other in a conference room. It's been hard, but I think there are some really interesting lessons inside of that.
Yeah, I think that the crucible for what the two of you are talking about the challenge of being true to values in order to work through our biggest challenges. The crucible for that is a word that sounds so innocent, which is this has been a year that's really crystallized polarized differences. And we've always said differences plus trust equal brilliance. Well, I have not seen a more challenging social environment than this year in terms of differences that actually pulled people apart rather than were a source of trusting discourse that then created new possibilities. So it's crucial that we learn from that. We've seen so much, whether it's do you mask or not, do you believe it's that or not, there are political current issues that are going on that, you know, I've mentioned this to the two of you earlier, that the etymological root of the word respect comes from Greek, and the word originally meant to be willing to look again. And it's a time for us to stop and look at the differences that are most stuck, most toxic. Who is willing to stop and look again at the other and say, as an act of respect, I'm going to discover how this all makes sense from your point of view, rather than we stay in the perpetual bias of having already decided who's good, bad, right, and wrong.
Mick, I'm also wondering if part of that is a willingness to stop and look again at myself and my places where I have a stuck explanation, an unnoticed bias, an unnoticed commitment to something that maybe is no longer true, right? I think this has been a year, particularly for, I think many of you here are with us in the US, but here in the US with the social reckoning, it's been a time for many of us who are white to actually take a pause and just think about the impact on the Black and brown citizens in the US and the impact that they've been under for so many years, right? And so that it took everything that's happened this year saddens me that it took us this long, but I think that's another lesson from the year.
And I think part of the challenge that you're both underlining is that the culture writ large is encouraging. I mean, especially, well, we've taken it to the level of entertainment. So on television, whenever they're bringing people together to talk about intractable issues like some of the social reckoning, what they usually bring on are people committed to not learning from each other. So they're committed to expressing a point of view. So who gets on those shows their job is to have a strong opinion, articulate it strongly, and defend it against all comers. You know, that's our entertainment now. And that's become too often the way that people are looking at how do we deal with really challenging issues. So it's a true act of leadership to do what you're saying, Robin, is to look homeward and say, okay, wait a minute, let me start with who I am in this, and can I actually lead through example the kind of respect that you're talking about, Mickey, given that the culture and our larger sources that affect us in terms of how we deal with intractable issues, whether it's the government or whether it's television or whatever, are really poor examples of that. So it requires swimming up against a cultural stream. Not easy to do.
And a bit of vulnerability, honestly, right? Like it takes actually quite a bit of, I think that's the other thing that this year has shown, is that some of the leaders that I have actually respected the most this year have really demonstrated some of that vulnerability in all of these realms, whether that's not having the answers to everything or being willing to take a step and really reflect on their own actions. But there's something about the vulnerability that we've all felt, and the leaders that I've really respected have been willing to sort of be in that with people.
You know, I think vulnerability has been a hot word for a few years now, and many people have been trying to rehabilitate it so it doesn't sound like weak. But that being available to be affected, that being available to not have the answer and to share the question, I just think that's an act of strength. It's the opposite of it's an act of weakness. That people then realize, oh, I too can say where I'm lost, where I'm insufficient, and what I need. So I think, you know, those of you who love the ongoing delving into neurology, know what mirror neurons are, that vulnerable and yet deeply strong leader available to be made stronger by others, that behavior can be mirrored.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. So if of the leaders that you've seen do that well this year, since we all know that is not an easy thing to do, achieve the vulnerability, have the challenging conversations, and exercise respect, what do you think has helped those leaders? What supported them in making that choice versus the easier choice of not diving into the vulnerability and the challenge?
Really great question, Emma Rose.
I'm thinking of real people when you ask that. So what do y'all say? Because I like that question. It drives me to real people.
For me, and I don't want to go there too fast because it's where we go often, but I really do think a real commitment to being in the present moment with people. The leaders that I have seen, they're not blaming the past or longing for something that's impossible in their past. They really are present to what's happening in this moment and are willing to be really connected and share in that with people. So for me, it's something about that real connection to, yep, this is happening, right? So presence is, you know, being here without judgment. And that's been a hard thing this year, right? Without prejudice, that's been a hard thing this year, to be in this moment without judging it as right or wrong, good or bad, and really just being thoughtful about what does this moment show us. I see Jeff's comment here about like what new ideas or ways of acting can be experimented with. That requires us being present to hear and not wishing it was somehow else.
You know, I can think of two people. I'll say what they demonstrated. That it's related. The first one's related to what you just said. So somebody running an 80,000 person organization, being a CEO, operating in countries around the world. I think what his biggest contribution this year, if he was here, he would say this himself because he said it to me, was he learned to be interested in what's present for everybody else, whether it was good, bad, liked it, or didn't like it. because he said earlier in his career, he noticed he was cultivating people being positive rather than just being exactly how they were. And so that presence for self and present for whatever's there for everybody else. So that what you're dealing with is the early unveiling of what people need help with rather than the late unveiling after it's becomes hard, difficult to deal with. The other one is someone who has presented me with a challenge that I'm being deeply bothered by, because it strikes me as noble and good and true and maybe too damn difficult for a dog as old as me. Which is, this is somebody else who I respect said, in the face of this incredible array of polarized differences that we see all over the world, the question was posed to me, would you consider spending next year giving up blame and doing your best to live a no-fault life? Like, whatever way you explain what's happening, the explanation can't be, well, it's because what's wrong with this person, or what's wrong with me, or what's wrong with the circumstances. So I'd have to have a blamectomy. And I'm so brilliant at blame. But this notion of, can we live a no-fault life? That's what hit me. If you took out just my explanation as who's wrong, how would that strengthen and cultivate our ability as influential human beings to come up with other ways of explaining things that unlock value that blame obscures?
I think an important, I love that, because there's, give up blame. Why? It's been my friend for so long. Served me so well. No.
Yeah, but what if they are wrong? Yeah, I used to have a T-shirt that said, "I can't help it if I'm right."
I've seen the license plate that said, "I'd like to be wrong, but I don't live with the right people for that." There's a companion piece, I think, to that, Mickey and Robin and Emma Rose, that part of it is recognizing that I am perpetually unfinished. I'm always on the edge of my learning. So that learning doesn't automatically mean I was wrong and screwed up and damaged and I need to, flagellate myself and mea culpa. It's like, no. I'm perpetually, and we are perpetually unfinished as a team, as a group of leaders, as professionals, as parents, as children, as friends, whatever. So that learning becomes an opportunity for an acknowledgement that this is a great way to live life. If I walk around like I should be finished, especially at my age, I ought to be done. So anything I learn, first, I have to resist that because it means I'm not finished. But second thing is, I'm not open to discovering what everything has to teach me at that moment. So that's part of that vulnerability, I think, is to be perpetually unfinished. And Mickey, that Rabbi Heschel that said that I asked for wonder, you know that better than I. Maybe you can say that, give that quote.
Well, it's Abraham Joshua Heschel. When he was dying, someone asked him, did he get what he wanted from being alive? And he said, I got everything I asked God for. And they said, what did you ask God for? And he said, I asked for wonder.
Imagine treating this year through the eyes of wonder, through the eyes of awe, not like, oh crap, this is a terrible year, but awe, how different would that be? The resistance would fall away and the possibilities would open themselves up to us.
The practical power in what you just said, Jim, is, recently I saw someone who's sophisticated, successful, been around a long time, has credentials, letters after their name, et cetera, debriefing a lengthy period of trying to make some things happen. And this person, after, I don't know, was this 60 or 90 minute conversation, could locate no lesson from the year that had that person evolve.
Wow.
It was all things that were wrong in the circumstances or wrong with other people. And so that that being available to being perpetually unfinished, like a chance to have my best day be forever in front of me.
Right.
There are
Yeah.
people that get very successful, but then get kind of dulled and deadened to the spirit that you just said.
Yeah. That's
Robin, I think we shift back to you now to make sense of all this, bring it together in some brilliant way to transform the qualities of people's
There we
lives.
go.
So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, actually, I think a lot of this conversation all nests pretty nicely together, right? So there is something about presence and vulnerability and being open and available that I think 2020 has taught us, right? That the possibilities do really lie in the meaning making that leaders provide to an organization, and the meaning making starts with how they explain themselves, is a big part of that. So I think for me, some of the meaning making out of this year has been, I saw some people say it's been a year of growth. For us here at Conversant, it's also been a year of experimentation. So these forums have been an experiment. Very grateful to Emma Rose for her leadership and helping us to coordinate them and put them together. Grateful to everyone that's here with us today and those who have been with us throughout the year as we've experimented with this format. Our plan is to continue it into next year on a regular rhythm, so you look out for more on that. And then I think as we sort of transition and start to think about next year, the question we want to pose, Jim, I'm going to steal this from you, but I'll attribute it to you. You love to talk about, are you the storyteller or the story told, right? That we all have a choice to make in our day-to-day life about which one do we want to be. And so I think the challenge that we're going to pose to all of you here today is, what's the story you want to tell about 2020 that actually creates new possibilities into 2021? So we're going to leave you with that for today. What's the meaning you want to make from 2020 that actually causes strength for 2021?
Robin, right as you're saying that, Ray Valley wrote, "We are living and creating history."
That's right.
Which fits exactly with what you just said.
Right.
The way we live is creating history.
Absolutely.
And if I can make one comment,
Jim,
just quickly, just this notion that to add to that, what I love is the opportunity for all of us in these fractured times is to be an agent of what Tatiana put on early in the chat, which is healing. Is how can we be someone that actually causes healing in the face of all the forces that are pulling against us? What a wonderful opportunity as the calendar flips over to be able to be an agent of healing at a time when so much pain and so much isolation is tearing at the fabric of who we are.
Mick, Emma Rose, anything you'd like to say as we depart for the day?
I'll just say thank you, everybody, for supporting the company and this endeavor here. We have been right there with you with challenge this year, and yet here we are at the end, and we'll be making our own meaning. I think we all feel pretty optimistic about what we've learned here this year. I'd also just say I invite you guys to maybe bring that same question to your teams, and if this conversation would help spark a conversation with your teams, we will have the recording available like we usually do, and if you registered, we'll send you that in an email, and we hope to see you next year.
That's great. Enjoy the end of the year, everyone. Happy holidays for those of you celebrating holidays at this time of the year. Wash your hands, wear your masks. Bye, everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank you for our relationship, everybody.
Bye, all.